There are times when we feel like the waiting is too long, when the desire for a partner weighs heavy on our hearts. We look around and it seems like everyone else is moving forward while we're stuck in a season of longing and uncertainty. But in those moments, we must remind ourselves that God's timing is perfect, even when it doesn't align with our expectations. We are so often caught up in the rush, in the fear that we are running out of time or missing out, that we forget that the God who created us knows exactly when and how to bring the right person into our lives. Trusting in His timing means letting go of the anxiety and allowing Him to move in the way that only He can. It means believing that even in the waiting, He is working behind the scenes, setting things up for a future that's more incredible than we could ever plan for ourselves. During this waiting season, it's not just about holding out for someone to show up. It's about becoming the person God wants you to be. God is working on you. He's refining your character, strengthening your faith, and preparing your heart for the love that will come. But it's not just about you. God is also preparing the heart of the person He's bringing into your life. Both of you are being shaped and molded, learning what it truly means to love, to forgive, and to serve. This season is not wasted. It's a time of growth, a time to become more like the person God designed you to be before entering into a relationship that will honor Him. And while you may not see the progress happening right now, trust that God is doing something deep within both of you that will set the foundation for something beautiful when the time is right. It's also important to remember that we cannot control when or how things happen. So often we try to force the timing, try to make things happen on our own, but that's not how God works. He has a plan for your life that's far bigger than your own limited understanding, and it will unfold in a way that is beyond what you could imagine. Surrendering the need to control the situation and trusting God's plan allows us to step into peace. When we let go of the anxiety that comes with trying to control our timeline, we are freed to embrace God's perfect plan. We stop stressing about when our spouse will appear and start focusing on living out our purpose right where we are, knowing that God will bring the right person to us at the right time. And finally, it's crucial to understand that God's plan for your life is so much bigger than you can see right now. We may struggle with impatience, with wondering why things aren't happening as quickly as we want. But God's plan is not just about finding a spouse, it's about building a life, a purpose, and a legacy. The person He's preparing for you is not just someone to fill the space in your life, but someone who will walk alongside you in the journey He has laid out for you. When you trust that God is orchestrating every detail, even the things you can't see or understand, it helps you find peace in the waiting. You may not know when it will happen, but trust that when the time comes, it will be exactly as God intended, perfect, beautiful, and just what you needed. Trust in His plan, rest in His timing, and know that the one He is preparing for you will arrive at the exact right moment. There are moments in life when it feels like the waiting is unbearable. We look around and see others moving forward, seemingly finding their partners and building relationships, while we're still waiting for that right person to appear. The feeling of being stuck can bring a sense of frustration and loneliness, as though we're falling behind. But it's in these very moments that we need to remind ourselves that God's timing is always perfect, even when it doesn't match up with our own plans or expectations. When we try to rush the process, we risk stepping out of alignment with what God has in store for us. His timing isn't just about when something happens, but also about the way He prepares us for what's to come. God is never late, and He's certainly never early. He arrives exactly when the time is right. Trusting God's timing means letting go of our fears, doubts, and anxieties about the future. It's so easy to get caught in the trap of trying to make things happen on our own, rushing into relationships because we think we're running out of time. But in those moments of impatience, we must take a step back and remind ourselves that God has a perfect plan for our lives, and He knows exactly when the right person will come into our lives. Trusting in His timing requires letting go of the need to force things, to manipulate situations, or to try and control outcomes. Instead, it's about yielding to His perfect plan, knowing that He sees the bigger picture and is working behind the scenes, even when we can't see the full picture yet. It's also important to recognize that God's timing is often different from what we imagine. We want things to happen now, and when they don't, we might feel as though God is distant or that He's forgotten us. But the truth is, God is never distant from us, and He is certainly never forgetful. His silence is not a sign of abandonment. Rather, it's an invitation for us to grow in our trust and faith. He knows exactly what we need and when we need it, and when we try to rush things, we may not be ready for the blessing that He's preparing for us. God's timing allows us to be fully prepared not only for the relationship itself, but for the kind of life we will share with our future spouse. He's working on both of us, preparing us to be the right person for one another at just the right time. When we trust God's timing, we also free ourselves from unnecessary anxiety. Instead of worrying about when things will happen or how they'll happen, we can live in peace, knowing that God is in control. This peace comes from resting in the confidence that we don't have to orchestrate our own love story. God is already writing it. His plan is far greater than anything we could have planned for ourselves, and His timing is never too early or too late. It is always right on time. When we surrender our timelines to God, we step into a place of peace and assurance that everything will unfold in a way that is perfectly aligned with His will for our lives. So, in the midst of the waiting, trust in His timing, and remember that every season is leading you closer to the beautiful future He has prepared for you. During the waiting period, it's easy to become frustrated or disheartened, especially when we feel like we are missing out on something important. But it's crucial to understand that this waiting season isn't just about waiting for a spouse to show up. It's a time of preparation for both you and the person God has in store for you. God is not only working on you, but He is also working on your future spouse. The time apart isn't wasted. God is using this time to mold both of you into the people He has called you to be, individually and as a couple. You are both being refined, shaped, and prepared for the moment when you will come together. While you may not see the growth happening in the moment, rest assured that God is doing something deep within you both. In your own life, this time is about becoming the person who is fully capable of entering into a healthy, God-honoring relationship. It's about allowing God to shape your character, build your emotional maturity, and strengthen your faith so that you are ready to give love in the right way when the time comes. Too often we focus on finding the right person, but we forget that we need to be the right person as well. God is building in you qualities like patience, kindness, humility, and self-control traits that will be crucial for building a strong, lasting relationship. He is teaching you to love others well, to serve with a generous heart, and to develop the kind of emotional and spiritual health that will support a future partnership. At the same time, God is preparing the heart of your future spouse. Just as He is working in your life, He is working in theirs, growing them, refining their character, and teaching them the same lessons. They are being prepared to meet you at the exact right moment, just as you are being prepared to meet them. This process isn't just about becoming better people, it's about becoming the person God knows you need to be for the person He is bringing into your life. The waiting season is an opportunity for you both to grow individually, so that when you come together, you can support one another in the ways God intends. It's also important to understand that God's preparation doesn't just stop at emotional and spiritual growth. There are practical preparations as well. God is aligning your life, your goals, and your circumstances for a perfect union. The waiting period is about making sure you both are ready in all aspects, physically, emotionally, spiritually, and even practically. God isn't simply bringing two people together for the sake of it. He's setting you up for a life that will honor Him and allow you to walk in the full purpose of your relationship. This preparation means that when the time is right, you'll not only be ready to share love, but you'll be ready to build a future together that is rooted in faith, trust, and mutual respect. Ultimately, the waiting time is a beautiful opportunity for both of you to grow in faith, trust, and obedience to God. As you work on your own personal growth, remember that your future spouse is doing the same. When God brings you together, you will both be ready for what He has in store for your relationship. Trust in the process and know that God is orchestrating this time of preparation, ensuring that when the right moment comes, both of you will be prepared to step into the relationship He has planned. We live in a world that thrives on instant gratification. We're used to getting things quickly, whether it's food, information, or even relationships. But when it comes to the timing of God in our lives, it doesn't work that way. We can often find ourselves trying to manipulate the situation, forcing things to happen because we think we know best. We might feel as though we need to rush into relationships, push things along, or create the right circumstances to make our desires a reality. However, trying to control the timing of when we meet our spouse is not only exhausting, but it also takes us out of the perfect plan that God has already set in motion. It's so easy to get caught up in the need to control things. We might feel as though if we don't make something happen, it won't happen at all. The desire for companionship is strong, and it's natural to want to be with someone who will share our life, our dreams, and our faith. But God's plan is never about us forcing things to fit into our own timeline. It's about us surrendering control and trusting that He has already mapped out the perfect timing for our lives. When we try to force things to happen, we may open ourselves up to relationships that are not aligned with God's will. We might find ourselves in situations that end up being more about our impatience than about the love and partnership God intends. Learning to let go of control and trusting in God's timing is a process that requires patience, faith, and surrender. When we give up our need to control, we're allowing God to move in the way He sees best. We have to accept that God's timing is not only perfect, but also filled with purpose. While we might not understand why we have to wait or why things aren't happening when we think they should, God sees the bigger picture. He knows the future. He understands the deep desires of our hearts, and He is working behind the scenes, setting things into motion in ways we cannot comprehend. The moment we release control is the moment we begin to experience peace. No longer do we have to be overwhelmed by the uncertainty of the waiting. Instead, we trust that God is orchestrating every detail in His perfect time. This also means that we stop looking for signs and shortcuts. We stop trying to help God by jumping into relationships that aren't meant for us, simply because we think it's time or we feel lonely. We stop taking matters into our own hands and instead rest in the assurance that God is faithful. This doesn't mean being passive, but it means being active and trusting, growing, and waiting with faith. By surrendering control, we are choosing to believe that God is good, that He loves us, and that He has something far better planned for us than we can even imagine. When we let go of the pressure to control and manipulate, we free ourselves to live in the present. We stop worrying about the future and focus on becoming the person God is calling us to be. We become more content with where we are in life, knowing that God is in control and that everything will unfold as it should. Trusting in His timing doesn't mean that waiting is easy or that there won't be moments of doubt or impatience. But it does mean that we choose to rest in His sovereignty. In those moments when we feel like we're running out of time or missing out, we remind ourselves that God has it all in His hands and He will bring the right person at the right moment. It's all about trusting the process, believing that when we let go of control, we step into a life of peace and trust that will lead us exactly where we need to be. The journey we're all on in life is one of profound purpose, even when it feels like the steps are unclear. When it comes to relationships and the desire for a spouse, we often get caught up in trying to figure out why things aren't happening the way we want them to, when we want them to. We ask ourselves why we have to wait, why the timing doesn't seem to line up with our plans, or why things just don't seem to work out the way we envisioned. It's in those moments that we need to remember that God's plan is always bigger than our understanding. We're not always going to see how it all fits together, and we might not understand the path that's being laid before us, but God's plan is perfect and His ways are higher than ours. Trusting that His plan is bigger than we can grasp is a critical step in living a life filled with peace, purpose, and patience. The truth is, God's understanding of time is vastly different from ours. We see time as a sequence of events, past, present, and future. We think in terms of deadlines, schedules, and immediate results. But God, who exists outside of time, has a perspective on time that we can't fully grasp. He sees everything from the beginning to the end all at once. While we're worrying about what's happening now or what's coming next, God sees the entire story of our lives written out, and He understands how everything fits together perfectly. It's so important to recognize that our perspective on time is limited. When we try to rush things or push them to happen according to our timeline, we fail to see the larger picture that God is working on behind the scenes. His plan doesn't just include the moment we meet our spouse, it includes everything that happens leading up to that moment, as well as everything that will come after. The experiences we go through, the lessons we learn, and the people we meet along the way are all part of the process that shapes us into who we need to be in order to fully embrace the relationship He has for us. The challenge for us is to trust in this bigger picture even when we can't see it or understand it. We want instant answers, quick fixes, and immediate resolutions, especially when it comes to our desires for relationships and marriage. But in the waiting, God is teaching us something invaluable. He's teaching us to trust in His process and to trust in His timing. We must come to a place where we let go of our need to control the narrative and give ourselves permission to trust that God knows exactly what He's doing. That doesn't mean that waiting is easy or that it doesn't bring frustration or longing, but it does mean that we stop fighting against the process. We learn to embrace the waiting, knowing that it's not a sign of delay or denial, but rather an essential part of the preparation process. God is working in ways that we cannot see. And sometimes the most important thing we can do is remain patient and continue to trust that He is working everything out for our good. It's also important to recognize that when we don't understand why things are happening the way they are, it doesn't mean that God has abandoned us or that His plan is somehow flawed. We can't always make sense of the seasons of our lives, and that's okay. What we can do is hold fast to the truth that God is good, that He loves us, and that He is faithful to fulfill His promises. His plan for us is filled with hope, even if it doesn't always align with our own desires or expectations. God's plan doesn't just center around us meeting our spouse. It's about preparing us for a life of purpose, joy, and fulfillment. There is so much more to the story than just the relationship we're longing for. It's about growing in faith, developing resilience, learning to love deeply, and becoming the person God created us to be. We may not see all the ways He is working, but we can trust that He is. We must surrender our understanding of how things should unfold and allow God to lead us in the way that He knows is best. There will be moments when we doubt, when we feel like we're stuck or lost, and when we wonder if God is still working behind the scenes. But in those moments, it's important to remind ourselves that God's plan is not based on our understanding of time or our limited perspective. When we can't see the way forward, we can trust that God sees the bigger picture and is working things out for us. He is guiding our steps, even when we don't know where we're headed. Our job is to walk in faith, trusting that He is leading us exactly where we need to go, even when the path isn't clear. It's in those moments of uncertainty that we must lean into our trust in God's goodness. We may not have the answers now, but we can trust that He is faithful, and He will fulfill His promises in His perfect timing. And while we wait, we also need to remember that God is not just working on the timing of when we will meet our spouse, but He's also working on our hearts. The waiting period is not a time of passivity. It's a time of growth, development, and preparation. We are being shaped into the people we need to be in order to enter into a relationship that honors God and fulfills His purposes. It's easy to get frustrated with the waiting, to feel like we're missing out, but in truth, this time is invaluable. It's during this period that God is refining us, teaching us to trust in Him, and preparing us for the responsibility and blessing that comes with a relationship. We must allow God to do the deep work in our hearts that will equip us to love others the way He loves us, to give freely, to forgive, to serve, and to be the kind of partner that God desires us to be. The people that we are becoming during this waiting period are the people that will sustain the future relationships that God brings into our lives. If we rush the process, we might miss the lessons God wants to teach us, or we might enter into relationships prematurely without being ready to give and receive love in a way that is healthy and lasting. Trusting in God's plan means trusting that He is shaping us to be the people He has called us to be, and that His preparation for us is far better than anything we could do on our own. The waiting isn't just about waiting for someone to come into our lives, it's about God preparing us, refining us, and making us ready for the relationships He has planned. And in the end, when we look back, we will see that everything God did in the waiting was for our good. We will see how He worked in ways we couldn't understand, how He shaped our hearts, and how He brought us to a place where we were ready to receive the love He had planned for us. We'll realize that the waiting was not a waste of time, but a season of preparation that made us stronger, wiser, and more aligned with God's will. We will see how His perfect timing was at work in our lives, and we will be able to rejoice in the fulfillment of His promises. The spouse He brings into our lives will not just be the answer to our desires, but the fulfillment of His perfect plan. And in that moment, we'll understand that God's plan was not just bigger than we imagine it was, exactly what we needed all along. In conclusion, the journey of waiting for the right spouse is not about passive waiting or feeling lost in the process. It is an active, purposeful season that God has designed to shape us, refine us, and prepare us for the relationship He has in store. Even when we can't see the way forward or understand the timing, we must trust that God's plan is unfolding in the perfect way, guided by His love and wisdom. Our job is to surrender our desire for control and rest in His timing, knowing that He is orchestrating everything for our good. The waiting period is not wasted, it is filled with opportunities for growth and preparation. As God works on us, individually and spiritually, He is also aligning the circumstances and hearts of those He has for us. When we trust in God's process, we are being made ready for a relationship that will honor Him and bring fulfillment to our lives. By focusing on becoming the people God has called us to be, we position ourselves to receive the blessings He has planned for us. As we wait, we can embrace the peace that comes from knowing that God's plan is bigger and better than anything we could have imagined. His perfect timing will bring everything into alignment, and when the right moment comes, we will look back and see how every step, every waiting moment was part of His divine plan. Trust that when it's time, God will bring the right spouse into your life, someone who fits into His perfect will for your life, and someone you will be ready to share in the purpose He has designed for both of you. Trust in God's process and know that He is working in ways we cannot see. His timing is always right, and His love for us is the foundation of everything He has planned.